Welcome to Timeless Voices. These interviews were recorded in July 2024. In this piece, you'll hear Mary Lampe-Saunders interview Peggy Hann. Peggy is 70 years old, an elder at long-term care in Happy Valley-Goose Bay. We spoke to Peggy at the long-term care home. You'll also hear 18-month-old Amy make an appearance. Do we have your permission to start recording?
Not a chance. I'm only kidding. I had to get you laughing. Yes, you go ahead and do whatever you do.
Where did you grow up?
Here in Happy Valley.
What was your childhood like?
Wonderful, really. Living here and what it was like here then, So it was really good.
How was your life different in them days?
Oh gosh, completely, really and truly, completely different than what it is today, for sure. We had nothing really and truly, So it was really, really different. I don't know how else to tell you really and truly, but we had nothing. So, we made do with what we had, which was very little. Back then we didn't have, how today you have everything, right? Well, we had nothing really and truly. We had a few toys. We had very little clothing other than what we, basically just basic clothing. There was nothing extra, really and truly there wasn't, because there was no money for things like that. And back then too, things to be bought in a store, well, you had to have money. And we didn't have a lot of money back then, so we made do with what we had. It was probably the best time in our life, really, because it was wonderful. It was carefree, Like, you have so much today to enhance your playing and getting about in every way in every day for your everyday living. But we had nothing, really. We had a few little toys, not very much, I can guarantee you. So we had very little, but we enjoyed what we had because we didn't know any difference anyway, so that's how it was.
Did you have parents?
Yes, I had mom and dad and grandparents too, of course.
What did they do?
My mom, she was just a housewife. And then in later years, a few years, I was in school. And she went to work at the hospital, and at first she was what was called a house mother, and she looked after all the young nurses that would come into work here, things like that. And then she got promoted to such a big thing back then, but she was promoted then to supervisor, of housekeeping and laundry and all those things. So, well, she thought she had a whirlwind tail, and that was what she did. And my dad, he was manager of grocery department at Hudson Bay Company. That was what we had in our family.
How did you get to school?
We walked. God, yes. I can remember, listen to this one now. I can remember when we were young, really young in kindergarten, grade 1 and 2 and things like that. In the winter, it would be so cold. And I can remember so many days where, all we had to wear on our legs, of course, was sometimes you might have tights, or things like that. But you certainly didn't have any pants or slacks or anything like that, right? But our mom used to come and get us on stormy days when we'd be being sent home. And I lived on Grenfell Street, and our school was down on Hamilton. It's the what building is it? No, it was the United Church School. And so that was our school. It was called North Star School at that time. So that's where we went to school. But I can remember Mom coming and walking down to get us because school was closed and it was so stormy. And she had this big coat where it was big and flary kind of thing. So you know what she used to do? She would put myself and my brother in under her coat. And we'd be walking behind her, holding on to her dress. And our older sister, she would be out front with Mum, walking, hold her hand. But that's how she would get us home, because it was so stormy. And she'd get us home that way, and us in under her coat, holding on to her skirt or her dress, whatever. And it would be freezing. And I can remember seeing Mum's legs sometimes, bare legs, you know. But I can remember all those things. It was pretty rough sometimes. It was hard. You know, it was cold. Certainly not the kind of life you have today, you know. I mean, we had to walk from, you know, where North Star School is, a building. Well, we had to walk from there up on Grenfell, right next to where Slippers and Things is. We had to walk up there. So, and stormy weather. Our storms back then were proper storms. For the most part, what we have here nowadays in the winter, yes, mild, isn't nothing really, you know. But I mean, you just had to do with what you had, and what you had was very little, very little. And we used to wear these stockings. Us girls would wear these stockings, brown stockings, and we used to have what was called garters. What we used to do was put the elastic that was called garters, and we'd have to roll up our stockings, roll them up like that. So that's how we wore our stockings, you know, and it was just big wide elastic. Certainly far cry from what you girls got today. You know, you're very lucky. You don't know how lucky you are. And that's a fact, because we had it pretty rough. But it was just you'd be in for a culture shock. I think if you girls, not only you girls, but if anybody had to go back to that kind of life for, say, a week, I honestly believe you'd come out of it like, oh my God, thank God we live in the world we got today, you know? I mean, things were a struggle back then, they really were. But at the same time, that was probably the happiest time of my life, you know, for the most part. But I mean, we had nothing, but we didn't know the difference. So that's what made things easy for us, right? But I mean, you know, and for us to have a pencil, well, that pencil would be with us until that pencil was so short we could just barely hold on to it. And that's the fact. They would be sharpened with a knife, dead sharp knife. That's how our pencils were sharpened. We didn't know what a pen was for sure, you know. So it was totally different way of life altogether, you know. But I think if any of you had to go to that kind of life now, man, I think you would be saying, thank God I live with what I got and the kind of life I have now, you know, because it was totally different. And to live in a world where you really and truly, you had nothing, really, you know. I had a doll, and I mean, she was so precious to me. And then my dog chewed her up. Oh boy, poor old darling. But I mean, we just didn't have anything. But you know what? The thing is that we didn't know the difference. We didn't know what it was like to have everything. So we didn't know. We were happy with what we had, because that was the only life we knew, right? But it would have been a whole lot easier if we had your lives. I can guarantee you that. That's the fact. That's true, you know. And for people to have pens and pencils, rulers, and all this kind of thing, you don't know how lucky, you know, you are that you're living in this kind of life compared to what we grew up with. We grew up really rough. But you know what, at the same time, myself and a number of people that I know that are friends and relatives and things like that, we have always said that we can almost guarantee that our lives back then were happier than what people go through today. Because today, people are so used to having everything, absolutely everything, that for the most part, an awful lot of people don't appreciate what they have, you know? And that makes a big difference too. Because, I mean, can you imagine being excited because Dad brought home a new pencil for you? And that's what you had was that pencil. But being so excited because you had a new pencil for school with after dinner or whatever is for the next day, and you could sharpen it. It was really good, you know. I mean, it would be such a culture shock for all of you, and not putting you down or anything for living the life that you're living, because you're very lucky, really, really lucky to have everything that you have. And you have it so easy compared to what we did. But I just thank God that you do. I wouldn't want anybody to have to live the way we had to, but we didn't know the difference, so we were still happy, you know. I didn't know what it was like to have probably 5 or 6 sweaters or different shoes and all this kind of thing to choose from every day, you know. So anyway, it just makes you appreciate things a little more. I think it does, you know.
What was school like?
School was, well, we loved going to school and learning and things like that, and we loved our teachers, and it was just, life was so much simpler that, you know, that was just how life was. I mean, we didn't have to worry about bringing lunch to school or anything like that, you know, or having gym clothes. Geez, we didn't know what a gym was, you know, and that kind of thing. We didn't know at that time. So, you know, we had our clothes, we had our books and everything like that. That was all we had, though. And I mean, toys at home, I mean, it was not heard of, really, you know. But school was, I mean, well, it was a wonderful thing we were learning, you know. It was just such a different way of life. Like, those were our big, important things, you know, in our life at that time. So school, going home and playing and that kind of thing. A lot different than what you have it today. I often think to myself, what would the kids today be like? How would they handle it? Any of you handle it if you had to live, say, a week the way we had to live? I said to myself, the kids would not make out at all. I'm pretty sure, although you could be tough enough that you would. But it would be a big culture shock for everybody, I'm sure. If you had to live in that day and age, you know. It was hard. It wasn't easy. The only easy time we had was out playing, you know, and I mean, well, we only knew what we had, and that was very little. And then somebody bought us a baseball. I'll never forget that. We didn't know what in the world to do with it, because we didn't have a bat with it or nothing like that. So I can remember being hit, I don't know how many times, inside the head with the ball, because the boys would be throwing the ball. Geez, the baseball, I mean, you know how hard they are, right? Hit, and geez, you get a baseball inside the head, holy God. But, you know, I mean, we didn't even know what baseball was or football, anything like that. We knew nothing, because we didn't know anything about it, nothing. You know, and then to see these toys then for the first time, you're wondering, my God, what do they do with that? You know, how do you play with it? But you just get used to it. But we grew up with nothing. You know, so it made you appreciate everything a whole lot more. And that's a fact. I mean, can you imagine being excited because you get a bag of marbles? You thought you had the world by the tail with a bag of marbles, you know? And back then, too, what we used to play as girls, especially, would be jackstones. And that was these little jacks, what was called jacks, and they were made out of some kind of metal or something, and they were just shaped something similar to a star. And anyway, and on the end of each was like a little ball, and you had a small ball with it. So what you do is you'd toss your ball, and anyway, it would fall on a number that you'd have there, and anyway, that was how you played your jackstones, because that would indicate that you had to pick up, say, 5 jackstones, toss them out, and you'd toss up your ball, and you'd have to knock as your ball was up in the air, knock, and then catch it. And as before you caught it, you had to pick up that many jacks. you know, and stuff like that. Like that was our games. They were serious games too. Holy God. You know, and if you could pick up all 10 jackstones, holy, you were good. So it was a whole different way of life than what you have today. Whole different way. So you're very lucky.
What did you do for lunch?
We went home, walked home for lunch, and whatever Mum had cooked or got ready for us. That was about it. Because, well, we'd go home and she'd probably have soup made, or it could be baked beans, or it could be anything like that. But I mean, we had to walk home for our lunch. And 9 chances out of 10, it was a hot lunch, you know? Because back then we didn't know really and truly like very much about cold food that you could have. We didn't have a refrigerator back then for sure. We didn't know what that was. You know, so it was different, totally different.
How did you keep your food? Like, what did you do with it without a refrigerator?
So the refrigerator was, my dad had what was called, oh shoot, I can't remember what it was called, but he had a big hole dug in the ground, and if he was lucky enough, by saving big slabs of ice that he'd get from the river, and he'd line that big hole. And anyway, he'd have sawdust and all that outside of that ice so that it wouldn't be melting. That would be down in the ground. And that was how we kept food, like meats and things like that, because there was no other way to freeze it or anything, or to be able to keep it. But it was down, and I mean, it would be wrapped and all this kind of thing. But it would be a hole in the ground that had ice around it. But there was no door to it, or anything. That he'd have a piece of board, like with a handle on it, and that would be the cover in, you know, to the hole in the ground. So anyway, we'd have to go out and be very careful too about hauling that up and everything, you know. It was far from opening the fridge door, you know, far cry.
When did you get your first fridge?
I'm not sure, like 100% sure of how old I was, but I think I was probably, I don't know, I think I was probably 11 or 12, I believe, when we got our refrigerator. And we had the only one on our street, on our end of the street. Well, my goodness, I can remember too. We had the first television. So anyway, none of the families had the TV or the fridge and all this kind of thing. And we only had it not because we were rich, far from it, but my dad, where he worked at the Hudson Bay Company, well, he had easier opportunity to get it. And, but I can remember, I mean, everybody thought, well, my God, they got a refrigerator and they keep stuff cold, you know, that kind of way. And they can actually make an ice cube up in the top of the fridge, you know. And I mean, that was such a big thing, right? And I can remember too, my dad coming home and he had these, I can't remember what they were called for sure, but it was like Cheese Whiz, but it was in like a fat tube. And they were so long, and anyway, you just squeeze that, let's say, onto a cracker. Woohoo! You had the world by the tail. But I can remember my mom saying to us, because, well, my dad, where he worked in the store, and he was manager of the grocery, and I can remember Mom saying, my God, we got these crackers, and they're called Ritz crackers. Well, and they were so good. And then when Dad brought home this tube, what we call tube of Cheese Whiz, and anyway, and all you had to do was open the cap on the side and take that off and just squeeze the tube, and you had a cracker with Cheese Whiz on it. Man, oh man, well, we thought we had the world by the tail. And that's true. It was seriously a big, big thing to have that tube of Cheese Whiz. It was wonderful. And I can remember all the kids in our close neighborhood, They used to love it if Mum would say, okay, everybody can take a turn and squeeze their own Cheese Whiz and their own cracker. So this is what she used to be doing all the time. And the kids used to love it. Well, we'd all loved it. That was something wonderful. Can you imagine having that today and being all excited?
What was it like having your first TV on the street? Well, the first TV on the street.
God, it was wonderful. And I can remember our friends coming in, like the first day in the evening it was, coming in, and they were all going around the back of the TV. And anyway, going around the back, trying to look, see where the little people were that was on the TV. And they were thinking that it was little people in the TV, and they were trying to see them. So, and then, of course, Mom and Dad just explained to them and that. But, I mean, that was such a big thing, TV. And I can remember one of the men in our neighborhood, he happened to be in that first or second evening. And I always remember him asking, how in the world did they get that man in there? You know, because he thought the man was in there talking and that, right? But he was telling the news. Anyway, it was a news story that was on. And he couldn't understand it. You know, how they got all those big people in that box. You know, it was fascinating to everybody back then. You know, because I mean they didn't know anything about it. And I mean, I can remember Dad telling us later, in later years, saying to us, you know, well, I thought, my God, you know, they thinks that I does that I makes those people move in there, in the TV box. He used to be always telling us things like that. But I mean, they didn't know. They had no idea, you know. It was, well, your memories that you have of it are really interesting, you know? So it was a total different way. And that's like to a radio. Well, where are they speaking from? You know, when you'd have the radio on, where are they speaking from? Where are they to? And I'll always remember one older man in our neighborhood, and he was over watching our TV, and he said, I don't know how they got in there. And I remember Mum asking him, do you think they're in the TV box? Yes, he said. And he said, how do you get them in there? And anyway, they just tried to explain to him, you know. And he didn't understand at first, but then after a while he understood. But they used to think that those people lived in the TV box. Yeah. So it was a different way of life.
What's the older man's name?
His name was Mr. Blake. That's all I ever knew him as was Mr. Blake. Yeah, and I can remember seeing him, and he had a bigger stomach, but he was so jolly, and I can remember seeing him sitting in the armchair, and rubbing his head, and he was saying to my dad, "But I wonder how they got in there." You know, and Dad said, they're not in there. He said, yes, they are. But he said, how did they get them in there? They're so big. You know, they had no idea, like, for the most part, what it was all about. You know, and they couldn't understand. So, and Dad used to be trying to explain, but Dad used to be saying, too, after they'd be gone home, I didn't know what in the world to say to them, you know. So.
How old were you when you got the TV?
I think I was probably around 6 or 7, I think. Somewhere around there anyway. I know I was fairly young. And, and I can remember walking in the living room and looking at the TV box, you know, and looking at it and walking all around it and everything. I had to see what it was all about. And I can remember saying to my mum too, Mum, I don't know where they gets into. You know, and she said, what do you mean you don't know where they gets into? I said, I don't know how they get into the TV box. And so that's when she sat us all down. Anyway, and just tried to explain things to us about the TV and how it worked. But we didn't know. We were only young. And I mean, I actually thought that there was a whole lot of little people in that box, you know, and for some reason they became big when they got in that box. So we didn't have any idea about things like that. Because we didn't, up to that point, we didn't even know there was such a thing as a television, because it wasn't called TV, it was called television, you know. We were very uneducated, like onto modern things that was happening in the world, my girl. Very uneducated. And then I can tell you this, and the TV was always like a whole lot of lines going up and all this kind of thing. Sometimes little circles would be coming and all that. And Dad would go over and he'd be smacking inside the TV. I can remember that. It would get itself fixed, like if you do that. But that's how different TVs were, because they had the tubes in them, those TVs did. And I suppose they'd come loose or something, I don't know, but he used to give it a smack on side anyway, and it would right itself. So that was our big technician then.
What is your culture?
My culture is Inuk and Inuit.
How far did you go in school?
Well, I went to grade 11, and then we went on to, by that time then, we had vocational school, and we could go further with it, of course. But when I was little, they had grade 11, and I can remember us younger ones thinking, the ones that did grade 11, which was very few, man, we thought they were the smartest things on the face of the earth to be in that big grade, 11. And then, you know, then they'd be finishing school and they'd be going on and usually getting married. That kind of thing, you know, and finding jobs and that way. But there's no such thing as, I mean, you were like, if you could finish school, even get to grade 11, I mean, and then to go on further, to go outside the school somewhere, say St. John's or something like that, well, that was wonderful. I mean, you were able to do a lot with your life then, you know, but we just didn't have the schooling that you do today, far from it, you know, so, and we had just one teacher per class. There was no such thing as a whole mess of teachers coming in or whatever. We didn't know what that was like. We had one teacher and she taught us everything. So, a lot different, eh?
Did you do anything for your career?
Later in life I did.
What did you do?
I went to, let me see, I get a short-term memory. So anyway, what I did was I looked after all medical instruments, and I looked after cleaning, sterilization, everything to do with all that. I did that for over 30 years, so I really enjoyed that. It was a good job to have.
Were you ever married or did you have kids?
I was married, and I didn't have children. So you can only imagine how all my kids today, I hope, had to lean on old Aunt Peg sometimes. You know, but I don't know what I would have done with it. And Hopi was part of that for a good many years, a few years. So, you know, she used to be, well, they were close, her and my great niece. But it was just them, that's all I had.
What did you love about being an aunt?
Oh my God, was always having the kids around and things like that. And then, like then when those kids got married and they were having children of their own, and Hope's good friend, she's my great niece. So, I mean, that was my life, was my nieces and nephews and great nieces and nephews. So that was the children that I had.
How did the way you were raised shape who you are today?
Gosh. I think in every way, really, because we grew up with nothing. So anyway, it made us really and truly appreciate what we did get. And then when we went to work, it really made us appreciate how nice it is to buy some clothing, proper clothing, and to have different things that we certainly didn't grow up with, because we grew up with nothing really, back then. So it gave us a real good, better look at things, and better look at life the way it was. Because we grew up with not a darn thing really, just the very basics. How would you kids manage with that today, I wonder? But anyway, that's how it was for us growing up.
Through the years, what's been the biggest change you've seen?
There's been so many changes. I can't really say put it down to one big change, but I guess really and truly it would have to be, I think, our different cultures that we have here and getting along with everybody, trying to anyway. And it's just such a different way of life compared to what I grew up with. I mean, nowadays, people don't, very, very seldom do you find people not having much, And we didn't have really and truly anything when we grew up. So today now, where you got everything, and it's so different. And I'm so happy that people today don't ever have to worry about, okay, do I have a pair of socks to wear? Or have I got enough clothes and things like that? Because you don't have to worry about things like that today. We had to think about things like that. And all of our things really and truly were basically homemade, We thought we had worldwide tail if we got a new sweater, but it was hand knit, So it was different things like that, totally different, total way of life. It was, back then you really had to appreciate what you had because you had so little. And now today, things are so different that when people nowadays get things new, and I'm not just talking about your kids and things like that, anybody, but when you get something new or whatever, it's not appreciated in the same way. Because today you're so used to having these things, and for the most part, being able to go out and buy what you need, or want it. But back then, my God, if you had something new, whew, you had the world by the tail. You thought you did. And to have a new toy, oh my God, because we didn't grow up with toys like that. It just wasn't part of our life, because we didn't know any different.
What made people learn from how happy you were?
God, yes. I have to say that I think today, if not only kids, but adults too, could ever live that kind of life for even a matter of days or weeks, I honestly believe, firmly believe, that I think everybody today would certainly appreciate more of what they have and what they see, jobs they have, money, all that kind of thing. I think people would appreciate it much more, that you have those things and be so thankful for it. Because when you grow up with nothing, that's what you get used to. And then when you start working yourself and being able to buy something new, holy God, you get the world by the tail then, because we didn't have it. So I think today it's just so totally different. Totally.
What is your advice for teenagers?
Ooh. Teenagers today, sit back and behave yourselves. That's only me answering being bad. But, oh my, I don't know how to answer that question really and truly. Because, well, I didn't have children of my own, things like that. So I don't really know. I can only go by what little I saw, like of young people today, what they're doing and where they're, So it's hard for me to answer, really and truly. I find it is anyway.
What is your advice for people starting their careers?
I think the first thing I'd have to say is sit back and really and truly try to decide what you want to do in your life instead of going and starting this and stopping, and all this. And I understand that people got to try to make up their minds about what they want to do and things like that. But I think it would be nice too, just to, like be able to just start off with one thing and then go further it, further the education into it and try to have jobs in it, what you've trained to do. But I mean, some people, I don't know if today you'd call it, I don't know, lucky or what, but so many people have so many different things under their belt, like different careers started and educations and things like that, that I don't know. Sometimes I think people must have a hard time deciding what they really want to do, right? And I mean, someone in my family, I mean, he's already got 2 degrees. And so anyway, and like, I think he's half wanting to start another one, really and truly. But I mean, it's so different than what we had, really different. There's so many ways you can go today, you got so many different little leads that you can take off onto, whereas we had none, really.
Do you have any advice about thinking what you want to do?
My advice, I think, would be really stop and think about what you really feel that you really want to do before you start off on doing this one and stopping that and doing this one and stopping that. Go and start another one. Things that would be nice to be able to just choose a career, something that you really want to do, and then go get your education on it. Because, and I know, I understand, like today is so different, and that's probably why I have a harder time understanding it, but when people, they start off on going to school for a career, a certain career, and then not even halfway through it, no, they're finished that one, they're not going to do that one. But so I think I'll start another one that I've chosen. And this might happen 3 and 4 times. But I mean, I understand too, people just change their minds and don't want things. But I think it would be nice just to start off onto a solid career that you want to do. And whatever it takes to learn that, whether it's university or whatever, and finish it and have a job into that one, because I mean, I think it's wonderful that people are capable of doing that, having 2 or 3. I mean, it's wonderful to do that, I guess. But that's just, for me, my way of thinking, and being my age and things like that, I guess it's a totally different way of thinking too, right? So, and I mean, I often wish that we had the opportunity when we were growing up to have the opportunities that the young people have today. You don't know how lucky you are. You really, really don't, for the most part. Because it wasn't easy growing up in my age, and then all of a sudden you didn't get to grade 11 for the most part. Like for me, I did. And there was a good few of us too that did. But, like a lot of times, even in my day, what was happening was that, okay, once the girls were probably in grade 9 or 10 and things like that, well, okay, they already had a boyfriend. They might even have a baby. And then they're getting married and things like that. So like there was no continuing really for an awful lot of people, right? There was no continuing on with educations and things like that. So you people today are really lucky that you can go and finish your careers and that kind of thing, and then go seek your jobs in it. because, well, for us, you worked in a store, something like that, right? You know, and that was all. So it was total different way of life and opportunities and all this kind of thing. Because today you have so many opportunities, it's unbelievable. And you don't know how lucky you are to have those opportunities. Because it's almost like for us, like my age and older, it's almost like you got the world by the tail. You really, really do. You know, you have it so easy for the most part. You have it easy to decide on what career you want. And then if you don't feel like doing that, well, okay, well, I can stop that and start another one. And that's what an awful lot of people do, right? And I mean, you're lucky. You're lucky you're able to do that. We didn't have that opportunity when we were young, far from it, you know. And then when we got a trade school here, good God, we didn't even know what a trade school was. When we heard the words, they were going to have a trade school here, well, what's that? You know, and they had to really explain things to us because we didn't know. So then an awful lot of people took advantage of it and went and did that. So you don't know how lucky you people have it. You really don't know how lucky you have it and how lucky you are. What great opportunities you have, really, you know, because, I mean, and today now, things too are like the opportunities plus the cost of getting that career or whatever, it's all laid out for you for the most part. There's very few people today that got to pay their own way on through, very few people. And I mean, in my day, well, if you were looking for that kind of thing, well, you had to have money in order to do it because it cost money. And our families didn't have money. So you had to go working. If that was your goal, was to have, you know, a career out of something you had to go to school for, then you had to work to support yourself in that kind of way, you know, and then go off to school to seek that career. And it wasn't always easy either, you know, and for us here, we had to leave home and go to St. John's or somewhere else where they had more opportunities for us to try to educate ourselves and to try to get a career. So it was a lot different back then than it is now. A lot different. You know, because you have such opportunities now today, doesn't mean to say that right out of school you got to go into this and do that and all this kind of thing. I think it's wonderful when people can try to take time to really and truly decide what they really want to do. And if they don't want to do that, okay, that's fine too, but as long as you keep yourself gainfully employed and all that kind of thing. But I mean, to me too, I mean, okay, yes, you got the world by the tail compared to what we had when we were growing up. We had nothing, but for the most part, all of the young people today have so many great opportunities that I'm amazed that we don't have more professions today than what we do, really. So I don't know, but I mean, whatever you do, don't go ever thinking either, because people often think that, oh, well, they didn't further their education and look, they're only working in an office or whatever. You know what? You have to please you. You know, you can't go pleasing doing this and doing that because somebody expects that of you. You have to do what makes you happy. And it's not always what somebody expects of you either. It's what you need to do for you, what you want to do. And I think when people do that, I think they're happier, really and truly, you know. But all too often that happens an awful lot to young people, is that they have to follow what mom and dad wants and whatever, you know. And that's sad because you need to do things for you. So do what you want to do. And always have your own mind too. Don't go letting people walk all over you. Whatever you do. Today, I mean, you got the world by the tail, girls. You really do. Wish I had part of it when I was young. I don't know, maybe, I probably certainly would have had a different career, for sure. So, but I mean, surgical instruments won me over. So that's what I loved, was the instruments. But I'd love for people to take more time to decide on things like that. I really would.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Look after yourselves and try not to rush into anything. Take your time and make up your own mind about what you want and what you want to do.